I come across the street and observe a phenomenon that repeats itself in this building every single week. And it's really a cool thing to watch, and I enjoy it. I kind of get involved in it, even though it's a little difficult for me, but as we grow closer together, it's not that hard. It happens all over the building. If you walk in the door over by the offices, you'll find Susie there, and she'll be greeting people and hugging on folks, and there'll be a little knot of people that stand around the desk there and talk. And if you go down the nursery hall, you're apt to find Wanda or Carol and Trudy and a couple people down there talking to folks. And over in Perry Hall, you find the Sunday school teachers gathering there. They're talking, and out here, downstairs, you'll find the guys around the coffee pot. They're drinking coffee and talking and connecting one another. And talking about everything and nothing all at the same time. It's a fellowship kind of a thing. Well, it's more than just a fellowship kind of a thing. It's a connecting thing. We love to connect with folks. Several weeks back, I preached on being creative for social media. Do you remember that? That's the whole thing. The explosion of Facebook and Twitter and just hanging around is what we were built for. We were built for connections. So every time we sit down around the table and drink a cup of coffee or tea, for those of you who don't drink the holy drink, or Diet Pepsi or whatever it might be, we're connecting with one another. By the way, that's how relationships are maintained. Right? That's how relationships are maintained. By connecting with one another. Think for a minute, if you will, those of you that have been married for more years than either of you care to think about, or those of you that now have significant others, and if you're not married, think about the early days when you were first a couple. Can you remember those days? Yep. If you can't, dust off the memory a little bit and go back and think about them. I remember when my wife and I were first dating, and I hate to talk on the phone, please understand that. But when we were first dating, we could talk on the phone for hours. I remember laying in my bed in my room in Benson Hall of Trevecca Nazarene College, talking on the telephone way, way past the time when anybody should have been awake, especially knowing that my class was at 7:30 the next morning. But I wouldn't trade that for anything. What did we talk about? Everything and nothing. What were we doing? The word is, we were connecting. We were communicating. We were building the relationship. And by the way, I celebrate the number of marriages that we have here at MCN that are 30, 40, 50, 60 years in length. That is an absolute gift of God. You young folks that need patterns, you need only look at some of the folks around here that have been married for years and years and years, because they're doing it right. Godly people living together under God's plan. But here's something I know about every one of them. One of the key components to the longevity of their relationship is communication. It's connecting. It's conversation. It's talking together, one-on-one. Sometimes about monumentous things. Many times, about nothing at all. Just the events of the day. What's on their mind? What's concerning them? What do they find amusing? What do they find challenging? All kinds of things. It's communication. Some of us are very, very good at that. Have you ever known those folks that you can walk into a room and they don't know a stranger anywhere in the room? I'm one of those. When I walk into a new setting, I'm going to be the guy just kind of standing back here next to the wall, watching everybody. If I know somebody, that's where I'm going. And a lot of the people I meet new, unless I'm forced into a situation, I'm going to meet by connecting with them through somebody else. But there's other people, they walk into a room and you say, well, how do you know that person? And they say, I don't. I just had to talk to them. That's kind of twisted. But that's how they're wired. They walk into a room and they automatically almost know everybody, it seems. Why? Because they can communicate. They just have that natural connection gift. But the point is, every single one of us needs to connect. And I'm finding it interesting, the way we connect is through conversation. Even the modern relationships. Have you ever wondered what's going on when you walk and you see a kid going like this? What are they doing? They're connecting. Connecting. My youngest, she's the champ in our household. 14,000 text messages last month. I knew that would make it happen. It's connecting. It's communicating. It's talking. It's the share of information one-on-one. It's the building of the relationship. Jesus understood that. You may wonder why I started the way I started and read the passage that we read this morning. It's because Jesus is in the middle of a connection conversation. You see, what's going on here in Mark chapter 1, it's just the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. If you look, you don't find any of the birth narrative that you find in Matthew and Luke. You don't find a whole lot of other stuff. There's not a lengthy discussion of the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. He's just, boom, on the scene in Mark's gospel. And he's doing ministry. He's healing people. He's touching them. He's forgiving sins. And people are beginning to flock to him. In fact, as you read down through the 28th verse of the first chapter, you find that Jesus has an absolutely, wildly successful ministry right around the house of Simon, Andrew, James, and John. People are beginning to get the word that there is somebody here that's special. His name is Jesus Christ, and he has a message they need to hear, and they are flocking to him. The title of that is Jesus Heals Many in my Bible. So many, many more are coming. They're all looking to see this thing that Jesus is doing. That's a success. I mean, they're coming from all corners of the area. And then the sun goes down. Isn't that always how it happens? The days when you're feeling most productive, it's clicking on all, you think, man, this day needs to go longer because I'm getting a lot done. I'm making a big difference here. And the sun goes down. And you would think, based on what happened the day before, Jesus would get up bright and early, because he did that often, and he'd just go right back there and touch people and heal people and get the word out that God brought salvation through himself, that he'd just continue on this wildly successful ministry. But a funny thing happens around the 30th verse of chapter 1. The disciples get up early. They're anticipating going back and more success because Jesus is getting this rock star personality in town, and they're just going to make a huge difference. Except they can't find Jesus. That's kind of a disconcerting thing when you're a disciple. I mean, you're following a teacher, and when you follow a teacher, you generally need to know where he is. They're looking all over. The crowds are starting to wake up, and they're starting to look for and wonder where this miracle worker is. He's nowhere to be found. He's just not there. So the disciples look and look and look, and they finally find Jesus. Off by himself, all alone, praying. Off by himself, praying. Now I have to tell you, even then, for the disciples, that was not a normal thing. When there's work to be done, when there's a message to get out there, when there's people to be healed, the last place you should be, in their mind, is off by yourself. They said, Jesus, come on, let's go. I mean, there's people here to be healed. There's the message to be worked out. I mean, we've got to be doing this. It's what you were called for. And Jesus is all by himself. What's he doing there? He's wasting time before the Lord. He's wasting time before the Lord. Oh yeah, he is, John. Hang on. Let me get there. He's wasting time before the Lord. And I'm going to ask you a question I want you to think about for a minute. When's the last time you wasted time before the Lord? Because you see, who we are and what we are about as followers of Jesus Christ doesn't make sense to the world. And after all, how is it you get things done? You get up early, you work all day, you work late, you're at it. That's not the spiritual way about it. Jesus is wasting time before the Lord. You see what Jesus is doing? He's having a connection conversation with God the Father. He's praying out in a lonely place by himself, where all the noise around him just passes into the distance. And he can focus on his own heart. He can focus on the voice of God speaking back to him. He's wasting time before the Lord. And the disciples are absolutely dumbstruck. They say, come on, Jesus, let's go. We got to be back about it. Jesus says, time out. We're going away. Now get this. He has the crowd in the palm of his hand where he is. People are seeing the signs. They're seeing the wonders. The productivity is there. People are falling at his feet. And Jesus says, nope, we're leaving here. We're going over there. Why? Because that's what God's will is. And off he goes to live his purpose and mission out before God. By the way, you have to understand something about Jesus. He was powerfully aware of his purpose and mission. He knew what he was about. The gospel narrative is the story of people trying to force their agenda onto Jesus, when Jesus knew what his purpose was because it was given from God. And there's a one-to-one correlation here. Because Jesus spent that time in connectional conversation with God, he was always aware of who he was and what he needed to do. Jesus, and get this, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, the one came to be the salvation of the world, believed and knew that it was necessary for him to connect to God regularly. In other words, Jesus knew that it was important to spend time in prayer before God. So I have this question I kind of want to kick us off with this morning. If it was so important for Jesus to waste time before God in prayer, how much more important is it for us to spend time with God in prayer every single day? I have good news to report. The research that I see says Christians are spending more time in prayer than they were even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was about 1.5 minutes a day the average Christian spends in prayer. But we're improving. We're up to about 3. So we've doubled our prayer time in 10 years to 3 minutes a day. On this day of Pentecost, when we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit, would you allow me to submit to you that is not enough? Because we can't connect to God in 3 minutes a day. Wives, let me ask you this question. How happy would you be with your husbands if all you talked together was 3 minutes a day? Think about it for a moment. What would the quality of the relationships we have be if we only talked together 3 minutes a day? You can talk to a bill collector for 3 minutes a day. You can talk to your bank teller 3 minutes a day. It takes that long for a transaction to happen. But yet the people that we care about, the relationship that is most important in our lives, we're just as happy with a hi, how are you? Bless me, bless my house, bless my home, see you later. Jesus thought it was more important than that. He spent significant time in connecting conversations with God the Father. Let me just give you a couple things that Jesus' prayer time did. Through his prayer time, Jesus discerned the voice of God the Father. Through his prayer time, Jesus was able to hear God clearly speaking to him. I mean, after all, if you were in his shoes, I mean, you'd be exhausted after that day of healing and touching and salvation and people coming to faith. The temptation would be to say, yeah, let's do it again tomorrow. But that wasn't God's plan. Jesus spent that time, those first wee hours of the morning, focused on listening to the voice of God. And God said, no, they have what they need there now. I could preach a whole sermon there, by the way. Did you hear what I said? They have what they need. Think about the number of people who still need to be healed. But they have what they need. I want you to go there, my son, and take the message to them. Jesus was able to get away with where the clamor of the crowd was all gone. He was able to get away from the disciples who were hyped up on the sheer adrenaline that comes with seeing success upon success upon success, and go to where he needed to be, because it was the voice of God leading him. Jesus was able to hear clearly the voice of God. You have no idea how many times over the course of a week or a month people come to me and ask a very seemingly simple question. That question is, how can I hear the voice of God? How can I know this is the voice of God? And you know, 9 times out of 10, I automatically know why they're having problems hearing the voice of God. Think of it this way. Many of us are parents. Do you know, I've been a father for 21 and a half years. I've got 3 kids. 9 times out of 10, I can pick the voices of my children out of the crowd. I recognize my wife's voice just by the sound of it. How does that happen? We spend time together. I hear their voices. I know the tones. I know the inflections because we're together. Jesus knew the voice of the Father intimately among all others because he spent time with God and knew his voice. I think it's an indictment against us in the church that so often we have to ask the question, is that God speaking or is that something else? That tells me we're not spending enough time before him in connection, conversation, hearing his voice. Through his prayer time, Jesus submitted to the will of God. There's another time where Jesus is praying. You find it towards the end of the Gospels. He's in a place by himself again. He's just celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples. It's Passover week, and something powerful is about to happen. He's about to go to the cross. And he goes to this deserted place called Gethsemane, a public garden, but nobody goes to those places after dark. It's dangerous. But Jesus goes there. And he takes his disciples with him for support, but even then, he leaves the disciples and he goes some distance further in the garden to pray, to connect to the Father. Do you remember the heart of his will, or the heart of his prayer? Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. In other words, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to go through what I have to go through tomorrow. I don't need the pain. I don't need the suffering. I don't need the anguish. And he prays over this so much so that his sweat was as drops of blood. But as he prayed, as he connected to God, the prayer changes. And he says, but at whatever cost, Father, not my will, but your will be done. That kind of prayer only comes to fruition when we are connecting to God in the deepest parts of our being. we can only really tap into what we do so very often is we say, oh, I'm going to, or I want to do this. God, would you bless it? Rather than spending time before Him, seeking His face, discerning His will, saying, God, I don't want what I want what you want. Put my stuff aside. Show me what it is that you want in my life. That comes through those connecting conversations with God. Through His prayer time, Jesus discerned the voice of God. Through His prayer time, Jesus submitted to the will of God. Through His prayer time, Jesus also expressed His thoughts and His emotions to God the Father. There's another time we find Jesus praying. This time He's on the hillside overlooking Jerusalem. And we find a powerful testimony about the character of Jesus there. It says simply, Jesus wept. And He says the words, Jerusalem, O Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you under my wings as a hen does her chicks. But you would not. That's a prayer. That's a prayer of grief. That's a prayer of deep hurt over love spurned. Jesus does that regularly. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you turned your back on me? It's a prayer of anguish. Expression of feelings to God. Somewhere along the way, we've gotten the idea that our prayers need to be kind of tidy and neat and antiseptic. But what God really wants to hear is what's really going on. By the way, doesn't He already know that anyhow? Doesn't He already know that anyhow? There's something powerfully healing in us that comes when we give voice to God, what's really going on inside. Read the prayers devotionally from the book of Psalms. If anybody had a reason to cry, it was David. And he just pours his heart out. Sometimes angrily, sometimes with grief. But God's always big enough. God's always there to work in those prayers. You see, I began this series talking about the purpose of our lives, why we're created. It is to live connected to God. Well, the way that happens is through communication. Through connection conversations. Talking with Him. Talking about everything that's important to us. And nothing at all. Just the same as the relationships we have with one another. Connecting with Him. Pouring our hearts out before Him. Because as we give voice, He is able to do something new in us. Jesus experienced the truest connection conversation with God above. It was His habit. It was His pattern for life. So I have this question I want you to think about. If Jesus needed and safeguarded His special time for connection, conversations with God, how much more do we need that time of special connection with God? If it was so very important for Jesus to spend those times talking one-on-one with God, how much more important is it for us? Paul, in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, admonishes the followers of Jesus Christ, King James language, to pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. If that language messes you up a little bit, Eugene Peterson, in the paraphrase of the Message, says, here it is, get ready. Pray without ending. intimacy that God desires is the point of the account in Genesis where Adam and Eve walk with God in the still of the evening. What's going on? They're talking. They're conversing. They're fellowshipping. God's hearing what's going on in the day. And I think he was probably talking back to, because a conversation's always two-way. This is the side, it's not in my notes. Way too often our connection conversations are a monologue. It's like a stand-up comedian doing their thing. They talk, they talk, they talk. We don't stop to listen. That's why wasting time with God is so vitally important. Because we not only have time to talk, we have time to be still and listen and hear and discern his voice speaking to us. I have to warn you, I told my small group this Wednesday night, we're talking about practicing the spiritual disciplines, things like prayer and meditation and solitude. To really connect with God, we have to put the distractions aside. It means turning off the cell phone, or at least hiding it under a pillow so you can't hear it. It means turning off the TV. It means, well, Jesus in Mark chapter 1 went off to a quiet place. It means clearing our hearts of all the clutter so it's just us and God. That's a scary place to be in sometimes. Because it means we come really face to face, not only with him, but what's really going on inside of us. And it may mean we need to change a little bit. It may mean we need to make some journeys that we don't necessarily want to make. But when we hear the voice of God and his will, we just know that we have to do it because we love him that much. I have a friend. He's an evangelist. There was a critique leveled against Eric, and that was, well, he claims to hear the voice of God. Audibly hear the voice of God. And made some people, some Christian people that I know, really, really uncomfortable. They didn't really know Eric that well, just that he claimed to hear the voice of God. And admittedly, there are a lot of people that if they claim to hear the voice of God, people automatically, particularly in our world, they want to get the guys out with the rubber trucks. But this is what I found out and what I know about Eric. Eric gets up between 4 and 5 a.m. every single morning. Do you know what he does for the next 4 to 5 hours? It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. He prays. Every single morning, from 4 a.m. until 9 a.m., he prays. Can I submit to you that if you're praying 4 to 5 hours a day, you probably have heard the voice of God repeatedly? And you know what it sounds like? There's no doubt in your mind. You know, I'm just awed enough to think that's not crazy at all. He cultivates connection and conversation with God. I've been thinking a lot about prayer lately. Those of you that went to Mission Advance, formerly called District Assembly, heard a lot of stories about people praying a ton. Churches that do crazy things like get together and pray from 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. till midnight. Fast together, pray, talk to God. Funny things happen in those churches. God moves. Lives are changed. People are transformed. Because God has that free connection into their very souls. And they recognize what God is doing. You see, prayer is not about checking off on my to-do list. Yep, I prayed today. It's all over with. It's about cultivating the relationship that we have It's about being able to discern the voice of God. It's about allowing His voice to speak in us so clearly. We'd say that He's standing right here, right beside us, showing us what it is that He wants us to do, showing us what it is that's important to His heart, showing us what He's up to in our world. It's about loving Him so much that all we want to do is talk to Him, cultivate the relationship. But you see, the funny thing about God, He won't force that on us. And you have to know, He's God. He holds the world in the palm of His hands. He controls everything. He could send us a loud, blaring voice like Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments from on high. Moses! What kind of a voice is that? What kind of a relationship is it when you have to command attention? He waits to be invited into that quiet time with us, where we can share with Him and He can share with us. He's always there, waiting. Waiting while we're running here and there. Waiting while we're spending however many hours at work that we spend. Waiting while we watch Dancing with the Stars. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Never forcing His way in. But there is a problem. So many people say, well, Pastor Art, I just don't really know how to pray. Do you know how you learn to pray? I'm going to give you a slogan that you'll always be able to remember. This is how you learn to pray. How many of you wear Nike shoes? Thank you. You automatically know the catchphrase. Just do it. Because you never will learn until you do. And here's the funny thing. Did you know every communication style is unique to the person who does it? You don't talk like me, I don't talk like you. We don't relate the same ways. And how I pray will be. And that's why I don't oftentimes teach a whole lot of hard and fast rules. I mean, I can give you all kinds of methods to pray, but they may or may not work for you. You have to find for yourself the best way that works for you to communicate with God, to touch His face, to hear His voice speaking His life into you. Should have gotten one of these things when you came into the service today. Did you get it? Hold it up and wave it at me if you got it. Here's the thing. I kind of want you to read these. That's why we do it. But if you open that up, if you fold it the way it was given to you, so the picture's out, open it up and look right here. I don't put that in each week just to fill space. To make it easy on Pastor Nicole to get the bulletin done. I believe with all my heart, this is both who we are and who we need to be. Check out core value number 1. What's it say there? Lifestyle prayer. Eugene Peterson says, pray without ending. To live in the presence of God. So our natural communication with Him is every bit as natural as what goes on outside the doors in this room, down the hallway, every single Sunday morning. We just kind of walk into the presence of God and are aware of Him and connect with Him. In order to connect with God, to God in transformative ways, we believe God calls us to corporate for our God's call to literally march on, in the words of the song we sang this morning. To corporate and to individual prayer. At MCN, we create multiple opportunities to gather together to pray and experience God together through prayer. Pastor Butch leads a prayer meeting here on Wednesday evening, 6:30, over in the small chapel. Friday morning, I have a prayer group, men. Sorry, ladies, you can create your own. That's what we're supposed to do. Friday morning, we've done it for almost 2.5 years, 2 years fully. There's 5 or 6 guys we meet together in the office specifically to pray. I wonder what would happen if together we really began to say, we will be a praying church. We will engage those connectional conversations with God individually. We'll take this stat that says the average Christian spends 3 minutes a day in prayer. And let's be crazy. Let's double it. 6 minutes a day. And learn about that. And then double it again. And I don't know how many times a day you pray. I don't know how often you pray. What if we just doubled the amount of time we are praying? And let's look at 2 levels. Individually and corporately. What if you double the time that you spend in prayer today? Okay, so if you don't pray at all, you need to do something more than double that because you can't double 0. I know enough about math to know that. What if you double it? What do you think would happen? I'll tell you what will happen. You'll have a more intimate, power-filled relationship with God. You will begin to know His voice without somebody saying, this is where God speaks. You'll be able to recognize Him at work in your life, in the lives of the people around you. What if the number of prayer groups that we had here at MCN doubled? What if God was calling you? Don't look next door. What if God was calling you to start a prayer cell here at the church or in your home? People you gather together just to pray for God's will to be done. Do you think miracles would happen? In the prophets, the word says, you will seek me, and I will be found when you seek me with all of your heart. That's God's promise to us. You will seek me, and I will be found when you seek me with all of your heart. My prayer is every single day that we would be that kind of fellowship. We are so in love with God that we just can't wait to talk to Him. We can't wait to unburden ourselves. We can't wait to hear His voice because we live in connecting conversation with Him.